Jeff Ashley, who is the founder and president of Ashley, Rountree and Associates. Jeff has over 30 years of nonprofit leadership, management, and fund development experience, and has assisted numerous organizations in raising over $1 billion throughout his career. All right. I believe that I will now turn it over to you, Jeff.
Great. Thank you, Daniel and Jacqueline. Really appreciate you guys' help in setting this up. And I am now going to attempt to share my screen, and let me know if everybody can see that. Let's see. Is mine coming up?
Yep, we can see it.
All right, excellent. So, well, it's good to see, I know some familiar faces from the last conversation we had, and really honored, and thank you guys for having me back. Appreciate that. And, you know, today, I think as a follow-up, we really want this to be very engaging and conversational. I do have a few slides to share that I'll pull up here, because there were a few questions that were sent in advance of today's webinar. But, you know, I think a lot of the questions centered around, you know, with the Endow Kentucky piece, and certainly with conversations with donors, donor prospects around giving to the endowment. A lot of the questions that we got ahead of this were around just what does effective donor development engagement look like? And, you know, so that's really where want to kind of focus our time today. As Daniel said, you know, feel free to ask a question in the chat box. I've got a few things that, you know, I'll kind of lead off with, and then there are a few questions again that I tried to answer ahead of time, but really want to engage the group as a whole. And, you know, I think this is a great format to do that in. So again, thank you all. I'm happy to be here. Just a little bit about Ashley Rountree for those that may not know about us. We've been around for 20 years now, which is really hard for me to believe, and have worked with over 400 clients in and around the region. I would say 90% of our clients are in the Commonwealth of Kentucky. So, you know, we're very focused on the Commonwealth and in that, but we do get out regionally as well, and have worked with some groups that are in Appalachia in West Virginia, and as well as far east as West Virginia, and some national clients. But we focus on really helping to build capacity around giving, philanthropy. And so that can be anything from campaign planning and counsel to annual giving, major giving, planned giving, and legacy gifts. We do a lot of searches. We're quite busy right now with a lot of transitions with nonprofit leadership. So really anything that has to do with the business of the nonprofit, we've partnered with the nonprofit sector. And if you were on the last call, I serve on the board of the Kentucky Nonprofit Network. And, you know, one of the things that folks don't realize, and this really is thanking you all for your service to the sector, but the nonprofit sector in Kentucky is the 4th largest employer in the Commonwealth of Kentucky. So, and it's important to the economy. It's important to obviously social problems and outcomes that the for-profit sector, you know, doesn't typically deal with. And so thank you all in your role as either staff or board for really tending to that. And, you know, really this sector is vital to the Commonwealth of Kentucky. And I know your focus is on the Appalachian region of Kentucky, but, you know, what you do impacts the entire Commonwealth. So I just wanted to take a moment to say thanks for that. So I'm going to kind of dig in and, you know, again, looking at a couple things, and then really want to open it up, and I'm going to have some prompts here to ask everybody to kind of engage here. But one of the current programs that the foundation is pushing is really the Endow Kentucky tax credit. And the staff was kind enough to send me some initial information on current kind of how that's being presented and current message points. And that goes live, by the way, tomorrow. I think you all know that. But just wanted to reflect, because a number of the questions that we're going to dig in today are kind of thoughts and hopefully helpful hints were around, well, how do I engage in a conversation with a donor? How do I start that conversation? How do I initiate it? And what does that look like? And, I wanted to kind of give you, as I was looking at the materials that have been produced already through the foundation, you've got some key message points around the Endow Kentucky tax credit that are out there that are on your website. They're in a letter that was produced and sent. And those focus in around these kind of key things. And I think, in your all's role, either on board or with staff, it's important to kind of figure out, okay, what are those key message points for me to utilize? But really kind of 5 key areas that I gleaned from the current communications. One is, there are tax benefits to this program, this Endow Kentucky tax credit program. Working through the foundation would be you guys are the only accredited community foundation located in serving Appalachian Kentucky. So, you're really the only game, really the only accredited game in town, so to speak, in terms of bringing credibility to the table with the donors. Investing in people is rooted here. So I thought that was a really strong message point that says, look, this is all about the people. This is all about our family, our friends, our neighbors, and not only now but into the future. And so the money that is invested here is going to stay here and serve those people. I thought that was a strong message point. And then two other kind of key things that were in the current messaging is it's relatively easy to do this program. It has powerful impact, and we have experts ready to assist. So, we want to eliminate any barriers that donors may have in considering participating in this program. And by the way, there's a relatively short window of opportunity. It starts tomorrow, and it's on a first come, first served basis in terms of taking advantage of the tax credit program. So those are some key things, again, that I saw in terms of what those key message points that kind of talk to the what, and so forth. And what I want to maybe help board members today, and this can be translated not only to the Endow Kentucky tax program, but other philanthropy, other conversations you might have with donor prospects is then, really, what is the why? Why is this important for you is in your role to have these types of conversations? And again, this stuff you probably may have already heard, but it's just true when it comes to asking folks to consider making an investment of their philanthropy in the foundation or programs or services that are being offered with partners and so forth. And this truism, has existed for decades, and it's people give to people. And I think that's the core. That's kind of a core basis to thinking about your role and your responsibility as a board member, especially. If you're a staff member, you're in a paid role, so you gotta get out there and you gotta have these conversations. But it's just really important to remember people give to people, and it's all about relationships. So, if you use that as a basis to your thinking, it really, I think, and it should help bring some comfort to you that, this is not a hard sales pitch. This is not, shouldn't be something where you're trying to sell something that somebody doesn't need. If you're in a relationship with somebody, that means you care about them, and you should care about who they are, what they're doing, what they're trying to accomplish. And with that, the conversations that you have with them, the engagements you have with them should reflect that. So, you're simply beginning to engage in a relationship, beginning to engage in a conversation that helps them determine, well, how can they make the most impact in their community? What are the things that are most important to them, and how can they facilitate moving those things forward? And that whole piece, that again, really core to that is listening is key. So as that we go through, and I give you some very specific examples and maybe again tips on how to initiate the conversation and so forth, you're going to see some statements that I hope you can use that, really it's about listening. So it's not as much about making the ask for the gift, because that's about 1% of it. It's really about engaging and building a relationship, having a conversation, understanding what that person or that family or even that business, what some of their goals are in terms of engaging in philanthropy. But, it also is very important to say, if you don't ask, you don't get. The number one reason why people, and there's a lot of research into this, the number one reason people don't give to an organization is they've never been asked. You may say, well, we sent out, we just updated our website and we've got all this great information on our website that gives people, click here for the opportunity to give, donate now. Or we sent out, this great set of direct mail letters, or we had an event or whatever. But you got to be specific. I mean, I go down a dangerous path with this, but if you think about, if you're going to ask somebody to marry you, you don't say, hey, would you like to maybe consider, us getting together? And, you don't hedge it. It's, will you marry me? It's a direct ask. I mean, it's very focused. It's very direct. It's very clear in what you're asking. So, part of this process, and again, I know it's uncomfortable for some folks, is you got to ask at some point, and you got to be specific, you got to be focused, and you got to be concise. And it's not good enough, frankly, to say, we'd like your help. Well, that leaves too much wide open. It's, no, we want you to consider making a personal financial investment so that we can solve this problem. And when I say personal financial investment, you're even at some point, you're going to have to say a number, discuss, a very specific number. And you owe, the way we kind of come at it is you owe that person the courtesy of giving them, the clarity and focus around what it is that you're trying to accomplish. Because they're already giving you a gift of time just listening to you. And so you got to do that. And the last kind of piece of this, that especially for board members, and I know we had some questions, we're going to talk a little bit about this, that, it's, and I get it. I serve on 4 different boards. You have some board members where making the ask is and engaging in this type of conversation around philanthropy is more comfortable for some than it is for others. And in fact, it's probably going to be mostly uncomfortable for the majority of board members. But this idea of promoting the opportunity to give, is a core responsibility of board members, and you can't dismiss it. You really got to embrace it moving forward. So those are, again, some core things. So again, kind of the current efforts for discussion, we've talked about this, the efforts to build endowments, the current messaging, how do we identify people for discussion? There were a number of questions, and I do want to, encourage you to ask different questions as we move forward here. But and I just got a couple more slides here, and then, I'm going to ask for some participation here. But this kind of gets to about 3 or 4 key questions that were sent to me ahead of this webinar. And it was, well, how do we invite people to give? And what are words that work in terms of having that conversation? And so I've come up with, and we've used these, there's very effectively, these are things that work. And I want to kind of take you through these. And what I'd invite you to do is to consider, your words around these types of things. But these are phrases that have worked in terms of initiating a conversation. So that was kind of an iteration of several questions that were sent pre-webinar. The first kind of phrase is, and this works really well, is, I'd like to invite you to join me in a discussion about whatever. Or I'd like to invite you to join me in considering making a gift to support the foundation and its programs. That, what that says is this: I'd like to invite you to join me. What that says is, I'm already in. And I'm not going to ask you to do something that I wouldn't do myself. And so that is, kind of a disarming thing. And you're already sending a very strong message that you believe in what you're going to have a conversation about, and that you've already invested in what's going on in what you're going to have a conversation about. And another kind of nuance to that is, and this depends on the relationship you might have with the individual, is you could say, hey, John, hey, Susie, I know based on our previous conversations that the people of Appalachia are important to you. And knowing that, that's important to you and your family, I'd like to invite you to join me in a conversation about. So you can preface that a little bit. But that's a phrase that works. The second one is, and I'm going to ask you to focus more on the 20 minutes part of things, is I'd like to ask you to invest 20 minutes of your time with me to discuss how we can talk about this issue or that. And this really works as well. If you say, hey, as opposed to saying, hey, can I get a meeting with you? Most people, when you say, hey, can I get a meeting with you? It's an hour. They think that's going to be a good hour of my time or more. What we have found and what works very well is, again, being very specific and very clear, is saying, can I get 20 minutes of your time to have a conversation about? And at that meeting, I'd like to invite you to join me to talk about whatever. But asking for 20 minutes, most people are able to do that. And there's some psychology and research behind all this that I won't get into, but asking somebody for a 20-minute meeting works. And so I'd suggest that's a good way to phrase the invitation as well. Some additional just conversation points in terms of, and even kind of pre-invitation work, if you will, is depending on the relationship with the person, some of these questions lead to conversations around philanthropy. Is, have you thought about what you want your legacy to be? Would you be willing to share that with me and discuss how I or we can help make that a reality? And how I or we, that could be how the foundation can help make that a reality. And again, that kind of goes to, you may say, hey, John, hey, Susie, I know you have been such a great volunteer in Appalachia for the people of Appalachia over the last 10 years, 15 years. Have you ever thought about what you want your legacy to be in and around that great work that you've conducted? So you're acknowledging what they've done, and you're trying to help them transition to a conversation around what their legacy might be. So that's another great entry, conversation. A couple other things that I'll point to, and this is a good question too. When you think about your personal giving, what is most important to you? A lot of times people they'll answer that saying, well, it's embedded, it's important value in our family, or it's something that I want my kids to see that we do as a family, or faith. A lot of times the faith component is an answer to that. I'm called because of my faith to give. But that's a good question too, that a lot of people like to talk about, and they'll open up in that conversation. Two other quick things, and again, you can kind of mix and match some of these things, these phrases that work. But what is the most important thing to you in our community? If you don't know that, that's a great question to ask. And if you think about it and you ask anybody what the most important thing to them is, or what's their favorite thing to do, or you ask anybody about something that is important to them or like, they're going to want to talk about it. So that's a great question as well. And then, if you're also at a point, another nuance to some of these is saying, hey, I've been listening what you said to some things you've said, or, over the last 6 months, 10 months, I know, we've talked about some different things, and I've got an idea, and here's how I think I can help you kind of achieve goals or outcomes or legacy or that you've discussed. So, it can be a transition point in terms of that. So those are some kind of phrases. And again, there were several questions around that in terms of the invitation. Where do you start the conversation with a donor? And, these are some things to consider. So let me stop here and again, I've got slides for a couple other questions that were asked, but any comments on this or anything to add to this? Any other things that maybe you could share that have worked well, from your perspective, or even maybe what hasn't worked well?
I think if an individual that you're speaking with knows that you're also a donor for that you definitely believe in the cause. And I think that speaks volume when you're talking to somebody else. So I think that's important.
Yeah. And that's up that very first, Kathy, that's really important. And kind of inherent, especially for board members and staff. I agree totally that, that says a lot. So, if you've not made your gift, it's really difficult to have these types of conversations, frankly. But if you've made your gift, made your commitment, and it's not necessarily about the amount, you don't really have to go there. It's
Right.
about you're on board, that you've done that, you've taken that step.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that makes the conversation go a little bit easier as well.
Yeah,
So
definitely. Okay. Well, please chime in with any as we go along here. And again, any thoughts, but let me bring up some specific questions too that were asked, and then certainly want to open it up for others. But one of the questions that was asked is that some board members are prohibited by personnel policies from soliciting donations. So what role can these board members play? And so, for example, you've got attorneys, a lot of law firms say, you can't go out, you can't be a part of this. If elected officials or, so forth and so on, there are some HR policies depending on the person's profession. So what role can these board members play? And I would advocate that there's a lot of things they could do to really move the ball down the court. And remember, I said that, if you got to ask at some point, but really that's kind of the final step. And that's not the majority of what the engagement process is all about. So what role can these board members play? They can be storytellers, so can they get up, even stand up in front of a group or sit across the table from somebody with a cup of coffee or lunch and tell the story effectively and say, this is why I'm involved. And I think this is why it should or it could be important to you. And let me tell you the story about this. And, what does that story look like? So storytelling is big, and connecting, being an advocate, just in general. And again, kind of figuring out what that story is that you're going to share with people, and not being afraid to share it. Obviously, social media, being an advocate, sharing things on social media, and for these areas. Those are all things that board members can and should play if they're not able to directly solicit a donation. So again, initiate a conversation, share the story, listen to the needs, and really, bring that relationship equity to the table. And then at the appropriate point, directly make a handoff to the staff and others who will solicit, and I have to say it's important that handoff occur so that there's some strategy and thought behind it, because at some point you can talk about the great work of the organization, but at some point you got to move to, well, here's what we want to ask and here's what we need to do. So even thinking about, if you've got a board member that can, facilitate those conversations, tell great stories, really talking through that ahead of time and saying, okay, at what point do we need to hand this connection off so that direct solicitation can occur? So again, being, pretty strategic about that. I'll kind of add in here that this is a rule that we have too, is that no board member is assigned any more than 5 donor prospects at any given time. And what we've seen that work very, very well. We could, we'll have some people that say, well, here are the 5 people that we want you to help engage with, connect us with. have a conversation with move to a point where we can get to solicitation over the next 12 months. Put a time frame to it, but we say no more than 5 at a time. What we have found is if, you got well-intentioned people that have said, I'll take these 15 names, I'll take these 20 names, and then nothing happens. And, very well-intentioned, but we've seen if people take no more than 5 at a time, then something actually happens. They actually move those conversations, those relationships forward. So when you think about that, I'm getting a little sidetracked, but, in terms of those assignments that help with board members, volunteers, we kind of like to assign no more than 5 at a time. But a couple other things in regards to this question, what role can these board members play? Another very specific thing is ask them to host a small intimate event, at their home, or host a lunch where it's focused 100% around engagement. And in fact, when you're inviting folks to those intimate events, it could be at their home, it could be, lunch someplace out, and it's 4, 5, 6 people, or maybe 5, 6 couples or folks at a intimate gathering. You're telling them right out of the gate, look, I'm not going to ask you for a penny. I simply want to share the story, and I want to begin to engage with you and connect with you. And, that is a very specific role that you can ask with board members to play that's very, very effective. And again, finding that handoff point. But overall, this is the other part of this is I think you need to have this conversation before you ask somebody to join the board. Don't end up finding out about it 6 months or 12 months down the road. I mean, and people will change jobs, so things can change, obviously. But I think you need, before somebody joins the board, I think you need to have the conversation directly and say, let's discuss what your role with philanthropy and solicitations with other donors is going to look like. And it could be that they're prohibited by personnel policies, or it could be they say, I'm just really uncomfortable with it. This isn't my skill set or my wheelhouse. But begin to define, if they say, these are things I can't do or I won't do. Yeah, it's real important to say, but here are the things, you can do and should do, and get that buy-in before they join the board. And this might sound a little harsh, but you can't populate a full board with people who are prohibited or can't help solicit with donations. So you got to, again, think through that. If it may not be the right time, it may not be the right seat or place for some people, and having that conversation ahead of time can help really clarify that out of the gate, and it sets expectations, so it makes things a lot easier. So that was one question. Another question was, what's the best practice for developing contact and mailing list? And I'll kind of go through these quickly, but website is a great place, and having a little pop-up when somebody, if they Google and they show up on the website, is, after like a 5-second delay, that something pops up and gives them the opportunity to opt in and say, to keep up to date on current events, put in your name and email. And I wouldn't ask for anything more than that, by the way. I would just ask for name and email. This idea of intimate board hosting events where you collect, contact information and peer-to-peer collection, that's a little more one-off-ish, but those work as well. Certainly your organizational events, if there are special events where you're bringing in, a couple hundred people, make sure that there's an opportunity to collect names. You might have somebody that has bought a table of 8, but they don't give you might just have the names, but you don't have the contact information for those folks. So you might want to make sure that you put something at the table to give them the opportunity to give you their name and contact information. Certainly social media and blogs are good avenues there as well. This next point has really taken off really during the pandemic, and we think it's here to stay, but it's leveraging things like social media, like your website, asking board members to send things out to peers. And it's short 2 or 3 question surveys. Just saying, you might even say, what if I'm in a particular county, it might be, what's the top issue that the foundation should address in this county? And it's using those petitions or, hey, we're trying to advocate for this and, sign this petition type of thing. But the survey thing, again, 2, 3, 4 question surveys that's sent out, and then you ask board members and others to push that out via their social media or their email list. And then at the end of that survey, you're saying, hey, give us your name and your email, and we'll keep you in the loop. But this is something we've seen a huge increase in activity with, especially during the pandemic, and we see it continuing. People want to give you their opinions. They're going to answer 2 or 3 question surveys, and it's a great way to begin to engage folks who might have an interest in the organization. A couple other ways, providing kind of free resources, educational materials, and if you've got a white paper on, maybe tax planning or here's the latest in giving opportunities. Again, they need to provide their name. They're giving you something in return for that free resource, that educational material, but getting their name and email address is a trade-off there. And then the other thing that we're seeing work really well too is cross promotions with other partner organizations, and these can be for-profit organizations. So it's I was at a regional bank this morning meeting with the bank president, and what they're doing is they're hosting a number of events, and they're paying for the food cost and so forth. And they're going to push out for couple particular nonprofit organizations to their bank clients and others an opportunity to come and have an event at the bank and just learn more about what's going on in the community. And so basically the bank's email and distribution and client list is being leveraged and pushed out to promote the nonprofits that are there. So those are, there's lots of rules around people opting in and opting out that I won't get into, but you really, if in terms of developing that contact mailing list, these are some things we're seeing work best. Name and email are kind of the first thing that you want to ask for. And then, eventually get home address and cell phone numbers added into that as you go along. Anybody else have anything to add to that particular question? Anything that's working particularly for you all? I think I see one question. Oh, somebody's got to take off. No worries. All right. So then this is the last slide I have with some of the initial questions, but this idea of, hey, what if I'm really uncomfortable with asking? And this kind of goes back to that role for board members that, maybe are not allowed because of personnel issues, but these are really the questions to ask. And again, I'm kind of repeating myself, but can you tell the story, and can you tell your story, why this is important to you and why it should be important to others? That's really got to be a basic commitment for each and every board member, even if you're uncomfortable with making the ask. And can you be an active advocate for philanthropy? Meaning, I may not be able to ask you for the specific gift or amount, and I'm uncomfortable doing that. But again, going back to Kathy's point of sharing that, hey, this is something that's important to me. I'm a donor. I give to this organization. I think it would be important to you. Just not apologizing basically for the need for philanthropy and really making the philanthropy part missional to the organization. And again, can you convene your circle of influence to hear from others? So that kind of goes back to things that board members could do that maybe, are in a place that they can ask. And again, I just have to say this though, but it bears repeating, is that staff and others can solicit, but the fact is that most organizations also need volunteers to help. I mean, most successful nonprofit organizations are going to have active volunteers who can make the ask. And I'm gonna add to this a couple things, because one of the questions too that we got right before this started was, what's the most appealing approach to donors? And there are a couple things that I'll say to that is, again, I think this is just a mind shift. It's kind of a culture shift. Is you got to come at it from an abundancy viewpoint, not a scarcity viewpoint. And I see too many of our nonprofits feeling like making the ask, having the conversation with donors is, well, I'm begging for money, or I'm coming at it not from a position of strength, but it's from a position of weakness. And you really have to shift that thinking to, it's really more about what you're doing to serve the donor and their needs than even it is serving the foundation's needs. Because if you can help the donor, if you can help a donor prospect get to a point where they're giving and they can experience the joy of giving, you're really doing them a favor, and you're bringing an opportunity to them, and you're enhancing the value of their quality of life and what they're doing. And that might sound a little cheesy, but it really is something that is a need that you are fulfilling with those folks. So that's a mind shift from getting from a point of I'm really uncomfortable with begging people for money or asking people for money. No, it's really a shift. I'm really providing a great opportunity for folks by engaging in this conversation. And so I'm excited to do that, and I want to have those types of conversations. So it's a bit of a shift in the way you approach it, and it's more of a positive approach overall. So that kind of again helps address this idea of being uncomfortable with asking. So I am going to pause here. Any thoughts on anything I've said, positive or negative, or any other things that have worked well personally for you all, or that you've seen in your organization? All right. Well, one question that I am not able to really answer that I wanted to pose to the group that was asked is, in what way do the affiliate board members, want or need the foundation to best support them in their development, engagement, cultivation efforts and activities? So, as a board member, I think the foundation, again, would maybe like to hear from you as to how can they best support you? What are resources that you need? Do you have everything you need? What can they do better to help you in these efforts? Let me position it this way real quick. What is the foundation doing really well to support affiliate board members? So Jane had asked, does it have leads of individuals to approach? So that's, that's a good, I think that's a good question. That's something where the foundation could say, hey, here's a list of folks who have been engaged with us. And, you might be able to, as opposed to saying, well, who do you know? That kind of leaves it wide open. It is very helpful for board members or volunteers to get a list of folks to look at it and say, oh, I know that person, or I can help with that person. And it's not necessarily then as much of a cold call if you know that they're already engaged a little bit. So I think that's a great, Jane, that's a great question and example. So providing leads.
I think that I'm getting feedback. Yeah, you're on. Okay, you're going to have to turn yours down. My thought is that the foundation for Appalachian, Kentucky has been here for a number of years. They may well have identified folks in some of our counties. I'm with the Upper Cumberland Foundation, may have identified folks in those counties. And they may have, in fact, even done their homework on them, as I know that some large groups are want to do when they're trying to establish contacts. And I think it'd be really helpful, especially for our novice fundraisers to have, or for any of us, even those that have lived in counties for a long time and have worked, raised money for other organizations, to have some idea of who and how to approach. Because some people may have been given to the Foundation for Appalachian Kentucky for a long time, and we have no way of knowing that. I think that at least the board members should be allowed to know who those people are. I'm not planning on putting it in the newspaper, but surely we can be trusted with that information.
Yeah, I'll say that's a good, and I will say from a donor perspective, and again, not knowing all the policies and procedures with the foundation, and respecting those certainly, donors expect board members to know that they're a donor. And that's oftentimes that's unfair, that the board members are expected, but donors think, well, I'm a donor and you're a board member. You should know what my, they kind of assume that and make that expectation. So, having some level of conversation about that, I think is important. We have typically, and this has worked really well too with boards, is we would routinely will put a list of 300, 400, 500 donor names in front of board members. We'll do this at a board meeting, and we'll take 10 or 15 minutes at a board meeting. There are no numbers. In other words, there's no gift history next to any of the names, none of them. They're listed in alphabetical order. And all we ask is, these are folks that have a history with the organization. And if you have a relationship and if you know them, can you indicate that by putting your initials next to their names? That's a great step as well, because then you'll be able to, kind of capture that relationship equity and know who knows who. And then you can kind of take it from there. So that's another maybe step to think about.
That's a great suggestion. I hope that Bobby and Kathy can take that back, because that would be really helpful for us to know the giving history.
Yeah. So any other thoughts on this? And there are a couple of questions in the chat box I'll address too, but any other ways that the foundation can best support the affiliate boards? So that might just be something you keep thinking about, keep thinking about that. John, did you have something? I didn't mean to.
Well, I just want to make, I think that improving the website is a big help. And it's going to help us. But I think Jane's question is really a good one. My guess is that during this last flooding episode in Eastern Kentucky and the serious incidents we've had, that there are probably a lot of people in our regions who gave funds that we're unaware of, and it would be nice to know. I think getting those names could be a big help in contacting them locally in the future.
Yeah. Okay, good. Well, I think maybe a couple of good thoughts on that and actions to move forward with. And I would suggest keep thinking about that. Don't I think constantly thinking about that. So we also had a question about giving circles, and that's basically. So, for example, the University of Kentucky has a giving circle called Women in Philanthropy. And so basically that is it's a group of women who have come together, and I believe the threshold is $1,000 a year. Some do more, but the minimum is $1,000 a year. And they come together, they meet on a regular basis. I think it's every two times a year. Some of them maybe meet quarterly, but they basically pool their funds. So they donate, their own funds, and then they pool them up, have a pooled fund, and then together decide a handful of charities to make kind of a big impact with those pooled funds. And so, there are lots of examples of that with young professionals. There are a couple of high schools actually in the Louisville area that started, the students started their own giving circle. and they learn about philanthropy, and then they all give, and they do different events, and they pool those funds and give to, or pick the organizations to give to. That's a great way to, a great entry point to engage people with that, maybe aren't yet at kind of the major gift or planned gift level, but are interested in this, and their resources are such that they can maybe dedicate $500 or $1,000. I think you want to set kind of a minimum level, not a maximum level, but a minimum level to annually participate, and use that to just engage folks and teach them about philanthropy. And they may pick a particular issue or two, but that's typically how giving circles are put together. And I think it's also important to note that in addition to giving the money, a lot of times they'll volunteer. They may pick a volunteer event and do that once or twice a year as well. So that was a question. And Sandy, thanks. You were very kind to say they brought me in as to help. So that was very, very nice. Thank you. Appreciate that. So let me stop here. We got about 10 minutes left, but that kind of, is a quick snapshot, hopefully provides some very focused, helpful hints and recommendations about initiating some of these conversations around donor engagement, donor stewardship, and kind of, things directed to some very specific questions. But again, I think with the flavor of how do we, what's the best way to engage donors overall, those are just some, quick tips and best practices that we've seen work, and then, hopefully some answers to some specific questions. But I'm happy, if there are any other comments or questions or anything that we want to share in the remaining time, I'm happy to, use that time. And then certainly, like we did last time, if something comes to you in the next few days or weeks, don't hesitate to reach out. Happy to engage that way as well.
Are there any other thoughts or questions maybe for Jeff before we close up today?
Sandy, I see your mouth moving, but I can't hear you. Nope. Can anybody?
Okay.
Sitting in the, oh,
Okay, we're going over.
Hey, Bobby.
Yeah. Now let me get the mute on. Okay. So Jeff, one of the things in rural America, and especially in our area, is that so many of our board members are on multiple boards, and they are committed on all these different projects and these issues. And I'm dead. I mean, I'm talking about myself here on those two type of things. I'm going to have to, I feel committed to ask and to fundraise for every single one of those issues. How do I keep from getting my message diluted? Because I just don't feel like it's an option to narrow it down to one.
Yeah. Oh, thank you for that question. That is such a great question. And like I said, I serve on 4 boards now, and I feel the same responsibility. So I'll answer it a couple ways, but I'm going to tell a quick story, because I was with a gentleman who was with Brown-Forman. He's retired from Brown-Forman, but he probably served at any given time on 7 or 8 boards, and he related the stories, multiple stories, and he was very active fundraiser for all organizations. But, he also told the story is he had a guy come into his office once who basically was suing Brown-Forman. And the guy came in and, was asking for money for an organization he was serving on the board of. So he on one hand, he's wearing his nonprofit board of director hat. On the other hand, he's being sued, And I said, well, how did you handle that? And he said, well, I just had to, he goes, it's 2 different, they're not connected. It was 2 different issues. And I just had to come to an agreement kind of with myself and how I was going to do this, that, these issues they're separate. And so kind of a similar vein, I think I would almost, as I go in and have a conversation with somebody, I, kind of preempt it and say, hey, we've known each other for a while, or we're new relationship. And I serve I'm involved with a lot of different boards, but today, here's what I want to talk with you about today. And this is why we're here. And so I think you got to preempt it. I think you got to acknowledge, I'm involved with a lot of different things, but here's what we're going to talk about today. And I really want to focus on that. I think it's pretty difficult, to go in, frankly, and I'm not suggesting you've done this, but I think it is difficult to go in and say, okay, I'm going to put on organization A hat for the first 10 minutes, then organization B hat for the next, and so forth. That doesn't work really well. So I think you got to, somewhat pick and choose, timing wise, who you're going to have these conversations with, but have very, very focused conversations and set it up that, I'm going to have this conversation about this group today with you. And maybe 3 months later, it's like, hey, thanks for what you did there. I'm going to shift and I want to have a conversation with you about something else now. That's okay. But I think you got to have a little time in between that and so forth, and just kind of manage that a little bit, if that helps, Sandy. That's how I'd approach it. All right. Anything else? Well, we'll give you 3 minutes of your day back. Maybe if we're going to end a little bit here.